It was a rainy Thursday evening when Mark Brenner arrived at the roadside motel just outside Bristol. He wasn't supposed to be there. The business conference had been cancelled, but Mark never told his wife. He just needed space and maybe a little silence. The front desk clerk, a thin, hollow-eyed woman named May, gave him a tired look. "We're almost full. Only one left. Room number 8. Mark nodded, paid in cash, and took the key. The room was plain, old carpet, a flickering lamp, a faint, sour smell, but it was quiet, and that's all he needed, or so he thought. At around 1:20 a.m., Mark woke to a thud, soft but deliberate. He sat up, heart ticking a little faster. Another thud, this time from behind the headboard, like something shifting inside the wall. He pressed his ear against it. Silence. Then a whisper, low, guttural, just one word. "Stop." Mark shot back from the wall, trembling. He tried to laugh it off. Maybe the pipes, maybe his imagination. He turned on the lamp, but it didn't work. Dead bulb. He slept the rest of the night with his shoes on. The next morning, Mark reported the noise. May didn't even blink. "Old building," she said. "Sometimes it talks." He tried to leave it behind, focus on work, but something gnawed at him. When he returned that evening, he dropped his pen. As he knelt to pick it up, he noticed a dark spot beneath the bed, stained deep into the carpet. He reached under to touch it, damp. When he pulled his hand back, it smelled of iron. He called reception. No answer. And when he looked under the bed again, there was something else, scratched into the floorboards. Help her. Mark drove into town the next morning and went straight to the police. He spoke to an officer named Lewis and told him everything about the noise, the stain, the words. Lewis frowned, opened a drawer, and pulled out a manila folder. "Someone else reported that room before," he said. "6 months ago, a woman, alone, never checked out." "What happened to her?" Mark asked. Lewis shook his head. "Her name was Ann Wills. Vanished. We searched the room. Nothing. Motel says she never existed." Mark leaned forward. "She did. I found her." When Mark returned to the motel, May was standing outside smoking. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "You should go," she said. "Who was Ann Wills?" She dropped her cigarette, stomped it out. "We don't talk about her." Mark stepped closer. "You knew. She came here running from someone," May whispered. "Said she was being followed, that he watched her through walls. Room 8 was the only vacancy. And she was gone by morning. No signs, no struggle, just gone." Mark couldn't leave. Not yet. He returned to the room that night with a screwdriver and flashlight. He tapped along the walls, listening for hollow spaces. Behind the dresser, he found it. A panel with uneven edges. It pried loose with a little force. Inside was a narrow crawl space, and a smell that nearly knocked him out. He climbed in. The air was stale, dark, claustrophobic. At the end of the passage, a small closet with a sliding door, and carved into the wood. She said no. Inside lay a woman's blouse, blood-stained and torn. Mark rushed out, but before he reached the door, something made him turn. The bathroom mirror had fogged up, though there was no heat, no shower, and drawn into the glass. With a finger, "He's still here." Behind him, he heard the floor creak. When he turned, no one was there. But on the bed, where nothing had been seconds ago, lay a photograph, black and white, faded. A man in a hotel uniform, standing in room 8. Underneath, Walter H. Dawson, 1956, head of housekeeping. Mark went back to Officer Lewis, who dug into old city records. Walter Dawson had worked at the motel, then called the Linden Inn, until 1957, when he was arrested for the murder of a guest. But the case was dropped. No body, no witnesses. Walter claimed she left in the night. Case dismissed. But rumors said otherwise, that she was buried somewhere beneath the motel, that Walter never left, that he liked to watch. Room 8 had been sealed for decades, until a renovation last year reactivated it. Mark realized he was the first male to stay in that room since. Mark decided to stay one more night. He left a letter for Officer Lewis, explaining everything, including the location of the hidden closet. Then he set up his phone to record and climbed into bed, staring into the dark. 2:14 a.m. Movement. A shape, tall and silent, stepped from the shadows near the bathroom. Thin, with a twisted smile, wearing a dated hotel uniform. Mark couldn't move, couldn't speak. The man leaned close and whispered, "You should have left." The phone recording cuts to static. Mark's car was found parked outside the motel. His belongings still in room 8, but no one saw him leave. When Officer Lewis arrived, room 8 was empty, closet sealed. No stains, no photo, no blouse, nothing. Just a single message scrawled onto the wall, where no pen or hand had touched. He watches through the cracks. The motel remains open. Room 8 is still available, but no one who sleeps there ever checks out the same. The sound of wood creaking beneath your feet is usually harmless, familiar even. But for Paul Devereaux, every step in his rented cottage felt like it echoed something hidden, something alive. It began on a stormy Thursday night in October, when a violent thunderclap jolted him awake and a hollow thump answered from beneath the floor. He paused, staring into the darkness, listening. No more thunder, no more wind, just that noise, that unmistakable, sickening thud. Paul was a quiet man in his late 40s, a literature professor who recently moved to a remote village in Yorkshire to finish his book in peace. The cottage he rented was old, worn with time, but charming in its solitude. But on that night, as the rain tapped against the windows and shadows crawled along the ceiling, Paul felt something else, an unshakable sense that he wasn't alone. The next morning, Paul dismissed it. Old houses settle, he told himself. He even laughed at how fast his imagination had turned creaks into ghosts. But something was different that day. His cat, Margot, refused to enter the living room. She hissed at the floorboards, backed away, and spent the day hiding under the bed. That night, the thump returned, louder, closer, almost deliberate. Paul began inspecting the floors. He knocked along the planks and found a hollow spot near the fireplace. Something beneath was different. Hesitant, he pried one of the boards loose. Dust and mildew puffed up, choking him. Beneath, he saw what looked like cloth. He reached in, expecting a buried old rug or forgotten tool. But what he pulled out was a leather belt, a man's belt, still fastened and stained. He stared at it for a long time, then dropped it like it burned him. The stain was dark and thick. Blood? He didn't want to believe it. Paul tried to rationalize. Maybe it was animal blood. Maybe someone's cut themselves and dropped it years ago. But he couldn't ignore the second item he found. A photograph, folded in half, water damaged, but clear enough. A man and a woman, arms around each other, smiling in front of the very same fireplace now in Paul's cottage. The man in the picture wore that same belt, same pattern, same buckle. Paul's hands trembled. The woman, unfamiliar, but it was the message scrawled behind the photo that shattered any sense of peace. "I know what you did. I'll never stop." Written in smeared black ink. Paul backed away from the hole, heart pounding. Over the next few days, he started hearing more than thumps, whispering, breathy, bitter words beneath the floorboards, too soft to understand, too chilling to ignore. He didn't tell anyone. Who would believe him? He hadn't slept more than a few hours since the discovery. He drank more coffee, skipped meals. Margot meowed endlessly at the living room door, but never entered. Finally, Paul went into town to question the old man who owned the cottage, Mr. Renshaw. The man's smile faltered when Paul brought up the previous tenants. "It's an old house, Mr. Devereaux," he muttered. "It remembers things better than we do." That cryptic sentence lingered in Paul's mind all the way home. That night, unable to resist, Paul ripped up more of the floor. The space beneath was larger than he imagined, like a shallow crawl space. As he cleared more dust and debris, he saw what he feared: bones, human bones. Fragile, brittle, stained dark. Paul staggered back, nearly vomiting. He called the police, told them everything. They arrived hours later, found the remains, sealed off the house. Paul was questioned for hours, but cleared as a suspect. The remains were confirmed as belonging to a man named Harold Pratt, reported missing in 1992. The belt, the photo, everything made sense now. Except one thing: the whispers didn't stop. Paul moved to a motel while investigators worked. He planned to never return, but one night he received a call from the lead detective. "We need to talk, in person." Paul met him at the station the next morning. The detective looked pale, nervous. "Harold Pratt didn't die alone," he said. "There was evidence of a second person, recently buried in a shallower grave under the boards. A woman." He slid a photograph across the table. Paul's breath caught. It was the same woman from the fireplace photo. But the photo, it had been torn, folded. The woman had been hidden behind it. Paul demanded to know more, but the detective shook his head. "We're not sure if the woman was an accomplice, a victim, or something else entirely. But what's strange is, your prints were on her necklace, and the locket she wore. Inside was a photo of you." Paul's world spun. "What? That's impossible. I've never seen her in my life." But deep down, something started clawing its way up. An old memory buried deep. A drunken night in college, a woman at a party. Her name, Mara. A one-night stand he never thought about again. His skin went cold. Paul began to spiral. What if he had known her? What if something happened and he just forgot? His dreams turned violent. Flashbacks of screaming, of blood, of hands around a throat. Unclear, jumbled. Was it guilt or memory? Days later, alone in his motel room, Paul found something tucked in his bag. The torn photograph. It hadn't been returned to him. He hadn't seen it since the police took it. How did it get there? Written on the back, this time in red ink: "I told you, I'll never stop." Paul didn't sleep that night. Every noise in the motel made him flinch. Shadows seemed to move on their own. He went back to the cottage, despite everything, needing answers. It was dark. The boards had been replaced. Everything looked new. But Paul stood in the center of the room and shouted, "What do you want from me?" The silence answered with a thud, then another. Then the floor beneath him cracked and gave way. Paul fell, crashing into the crawl space. Dust, bones, and a stale, suffocating air swallowed him. He lay there, winded, and then he saw them, two figures in the darkness, one male, one female, both smiling. Paul's scream was never heard. The police found the motel room abandoned. No signs of struggle, just a torn photograph and the scent of mildew. Weeks later, the cottage was rented again. A young couple, happy, in love, and on their first night, the woman woke to a sound beneath the floorboards, a hollow, deliberate thump. I wasn't supposed to be in that apartment. I knew that from the start. The minute I stepped through the door, something felt off. The kind of off that makes your skin itch and your stomach tighten without warning. But when you're doing a short-term lease through a private ad and paying a third of the market rate, you try not to ask too many questions. I just finalized my divorce, and the last thing I needed was to live with reminders of everything I'd lost. So I moved in without overthinking it. The building was old, creaky wooden floors, tarnished brass doorknobs, and thin walls that carried sound like whispers through a cathedral. I was on the 3rd floor. The landlady, Mrs. Elkins, lived on the ground floor. She was in her late 70s, barely walked without a cane, and had this unsettling habit of watching me through the window every time I left the building. She'd warned me about the apartment above mine. "Don't bother them," she'd said. "They've been through things." I hadn't even seen anyone go in or out of that place. Not once. But I heard things at night. Strange things. At first, I chalked it up to plumbing. Old pipes. Settling walls. You know the excuses we tell ourselves to stay sane. But this was different. Around midnight, nearly every night, I'd hear dragging. Not walking, dragging. Like someone was pulling something heavy across the floor directly above me. Sometimes it sounded like metal scraping tile. Then the breathing would start. Labored, almost wet, like someone was struggling just to inhale. I finally mentioned it to Mrs. Elkins one morning. She stiffened. "Best leave them be," she muttered, eyes suddenly averted. "They don't like being talked about." I laughed nervously, waiting for her to admit she was kidding. She didn't. She just closed the door in my face. That night, I stayed up with the lights on, phone in hand. Midnight came, dragging, breathing. Then something new, a thud, then another, followed by a soft, pitiful whimpering. I swear it sounded like someone was pleading, low, muffled. I called the police. 2 officers came about 40 minutes later. I was still shaking. I offered them coffee just so my hands would stop trembling, but they declined. I told them everything, what I heard, how often, and that there had to be someone up there in trouble. They exchanged a look. One of them, Officer Rains, nodded slowly, then cleared his throat. "Sir, there's no one living in the apartment above you. Hasn't been for over a year." I laughed, not out of humor, pure disbelief. "No, I hear them every night. Someone's there, breathing." dragging stuff. The officers went upstairs, knocked, no answer. They unlocked the door and went in. After about 5 minutes, they came back down. "Empty," one of them said, pale as chalk. "Dust covering the floor. No signs of life. You probably heard noise from another unit." I knew they were lying. I could see it in their faces. Something scared them up there. 3 nights passed. I didn't sleep much. The noises started again the following evening, but now they were louder, like whoever or whatever was up there wanted to be heard. I pressed my ear to the ceiling once, and I swear I heard someone whispering my name. Then, the next morning, I found a note. Someone had slid it under my door during the night. It was a torn piece of paper, scrawled in what looked like charcoal or some kind of ash. "They buried her wrong. That's why she's angry." I stared at it for minutes, heart pounding. Buried her wrong. Who the hell was she? And who left me that note? I confronted Mrs. Elkins, but she only hissed through her teeth, slammed her door, and slid the chain lock. I was alone in this, and the apartment no longer felt like a place to escape from my past. It felt like a trap. That night I sat with the lights off and phone camera recording. I wanted proof. Midnight came, then dragging, then moaning, then dripping. I turned on the kitchen light and looked up. A reddish stain was slowly forming on the ceiling, right above the table. I stood frozen. I didn't want to move, didn't want to believe what I was seeing. But then a soft thump landed above my head, right above the ceiling bulb. I jumped back, heart exploding. I called the police again. This time, they didn't come. The next morning, I went up there myself. I had to see. The door was locked, but not with a key. It had been nailed shut. Dozens of rusted nails hammered into the frame, sealing it from the outside. I stepped back in horror. Someone had sealed that place shut like they were trying to keep something in. That afternoon, I caught Mrs. Elkins outside taking out the trash. She looked startled when I approached her. "You lied to me," I said. "Someone is up there." Her hand trembled around the cane. "She was my daughter," she whispered, eyes glassing over. "Miriam, she lived there with her husband. He changed, became paranoid, accused her of cheating, watching him. Then he killed her, chopped her up and buried her under the floorboards in pieces." I just stood there, mouth dry. Then what? He hung himself in the same room. The police didn't find everything. They missed her head. Her voice broke. It was buried separate, in the crawl space. Her soul was scattered, angry. She never left. I felt sick. I waited until nightfall, then returned with a crowbar. I had to see it. I ripped the nails free from the door, each groaning like a warning. The air inside was foul, thick and humid, as if the room had been weeping for years. Dust caked every surface, but the floor, part of it had been dug up and sloppily recovered with loose wood panels. I pulled them up. Beneath, wrapped in old sheets, was a partial skeleton, and near the edge of the pit, something small, round. I leaned closer. It was her skull, staring at me with hollow sockets, jaw twisted as if frozen in a scream. Behind me, the door slammed shut. I tried to open it. It wouldn't budge. Something was holding it from the other side. My flashlight flickered, the air grew colder, and then the dragging began, not above, inside, the room, right behind me. I turned. A figure stood in the shadows, bones exposed in places, hair like wet moss clinging to her scalp. Her head twisted unnaturally as she stepped forward. Her mouth opened, but no words came. only that same ragged breathing. I fell to my knees, whispering apologies, begging to be let out. She pointed toward the floor, toward her remains. It took every ounce of will I had, but I buried her again, properly. I placed her skull with the rest of her bones, sealed the pit, and lit candles around the room with words I didn't even understand. Words from the back of that old note, scribbled in faint handwriting. It took hours. When I finally finished, the air changed. Warmer, lighter. The door creaked open. She was gone. I left that night, never went back. I don't know who else rented that unit after me. I didn't ask. But sometimes, at night, when I can't sleep, I still hear that dragging sound in the distance. Faint but real. And I wonder if I really buried her, or just gave her a reason to move on to someone else.